What if your greatest enemy, the man with the finger on the trigger that will end your life, suddenly became your only savior? Imagine you are 20,000 feet over enemy territory, your plane shot to pieces, your crewmates bleeding or dead, and the world's most feared fighter aircraft slides up next to your cockpit. You lock eyes with the pilot. You brace for the final burst of cannon fire. But it never comes. Instead, what happens next is so unbelievable, so contrary to the brutal logic of war, that both men would be forced to hide it as a dangerous secret for nearly half a century. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we are not just telling a war story. We are descending into a single frozen moment in time, December 20th, 1943, to uncover an encounter that defied orders, defied logic, and would define the lives of two men who should have been mortal enemies. This is the story of a crippled American bomber, a German ace with an impossible choice, and a bond forged in the heart of the fire. Our story unfolds in the lethal skies of what the Allied air crews called Fortress Europe. By late 1943, the air war over Germany had become a relentless, grinding meat grinder. America's mighty 8th Air Force was committed to a brutal strategy of daylight precision bombing, sending vast formations of B-17 flying fortresses deep into the heart of the Third Reich. Their mission? To cripple Germany's war machine, factory by factory. But this strategy came at a terrifying cost. To fly a B-17 over Germany was to have one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, with casualty rates that rivaled the worst trench warfare of the Great War. In a small briefing room in Kimbleton, England, on the cold, damp morning of December 20th, 1943, a 21-year-old second lieutenant named Charlie Brown felt the weight of that reality settling on his shoulders. He was a farm boy from West Virginia, young and boyishly handsome, but today he was the pilot in command of a 10-man crew. Their chariot was a brand new B-17G, serial number 423167, a plane they had affectionately nicknamed Ye Old Pub. This was to be Charlie's first mission as the aircraft commander. The target for the 379th Bomb Group today was a Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen, a critical industrial target bristling with some of the heaviest anti-aircraft, or flak, defenses in Germany. The men were quiet, sipping bitter coffee, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and nervous tension. They knew what they were flying into. Miles away, across the English Channel, another pilot was preparing for his day. Franz Stigler was no fresh-faced rookie. At 28 years old, he was a seasoned veteran, a Luftwaffe ace with 22 confirmed aerial victories to his name. He was a Bavarian, born in 1915, and flying was more than a profession. It was his birthright. His father had been a pilot in World War I, as had his uncle. Stigler had grown up breathing the air of hangars and the scent of engine oil. By the time he joined the Luftwaffe in 1940, he was already an accomplished civilian flight instructor. He was a professional warrior, flying one of the most lethal killing machines of the era, the Messerschmitt Bf-109. Sleek, powerful, and deadly in a dive, the 109 was the bane of Allied bomber crews. Stigler flew with the elite Jagdgeschwader 27, a fighter wing that had earned its fearsome reputation in the skies over North Africa. But Stigler was also a man forged by a code. One of his instructors, a decorated ace named Gustav Rodel, had drilled into his students a philosophy that transcended the brutal calculus of war. You follow the rules of war for you, not for your enemy. You fight by the rules to keep your humanity, Rodel had told them.
For Stigler, this wasn't just a quaint saying, it was a creed. He was 1 kill away from earning the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest and most coveted award for valor. It was a prize every pilot dreamed of, and on this day, he was hungry for it. As Ye Olde Pub and hundreds of other B-17s lumbered into the sky, their two worlds were set on a collision course. The mission went wrong almost from the moment they crossed the enemy coast. The weather was a nightmare. A thick undercast obscured the ground, making navigation a guessing game and scattering the bomber formations. A scattered formation was a vulnerable formation. The German defenders were waiting. Hordes of yellow-nosed Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts tore into the American bombers with a terrifying ferocity.
Imagine you are Charlie Brown fighting the controls of his massive 4-engine bomber. The sky, once empty, is now filled with black puffs of flak and swarms of enemy fighters that look like angry hornets. The intercom crackles with panicked shouts. "Fighters at 3 o'clock, coming in hot!" The plane shudders violently as 20-millimeter cannon shells, the size of a man's thumb and packed with high explosives, rip through its thin aluminum skin. The sound is deafening, a percussive metallic shriek of tearing metal. One burst of cannon fire obliterates the plexiglass nose cone, exposing the bombardier and navigator to a 250-mile-per-hour wind at 60 degrees below zero. Another salvo slams into the right wing. The number 2 engine is shredded, its propeller spinning uselessly. The number 4 engine is hit, trailing a thick plume of black oil. The electrical systems flicker and die. The hydraulic lines are severed, making the controls feel like lead. And most critically, the oxygen system is shot out. At 27,000 feet, the crew began to drift into the confused, deadly fog of hypoxia. Then came the blow that broke their spirit. A cannon shell exploded in the rear of the aircraft. The tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, was killed instantly. In the waist of the plane, other crewmen were hit by shrapnel. Blood began to stain the floor. The bomber's defensive firepower, its famous sting, was crippled. Of its 11 50 caliber machine guns, only a handful were still operational. Ye Olde Pub had fallen out of the protective formation. It was alone, crippled, and bleeding in the heart of enemy territory. In the brutal world of the air war, a lone bomber was a dead bomber. Somehow, through sheer force of will, Charlie Brown and his co-pilot managed to drop their bomb load over a secondary target and turn the shattered plane west towards home. They descended, desperately seeking denser air they could breathe, leveling off at a dangerously low altitude. They were a wounded animal, limping away from the pack, and the wolves were closing in. The sheer bravery of these young men flying into such overwhelming odds day after day is almost impossible for us to comprehend today. They were literally fighting for the future of the world, and the personal stories of sacrifice and survival are what make this history so powerful. If you agree and you want to ensure more of these incredible stories get told, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. It's the single best way to support the channel, and it means the world to our team. Back on the ground at an airfield near Givor, Franz Stigler had just landed. His Bf-109 was being refueled and rearmed after a brutal engagement. He was sitting in his cockpit, taking a moment to breathe, when ground crewmen started shouting and pointing towards the sky. He looked up. Unbelievably, a single American B-17 was flying slowly, almost directly over their airfield, at an altitude so low it seemed a child could hit it with a rock. This was more than a target, it was a gift, an easy, guaranteed kill. His 23rd victory, the Knight's Cross. Stigler didn't hesitate. He waved off the ground crew, slammed his canopy shut, and took off in hot pursuit. He closed the distance in seconds. His Bf-109 was a predator, swift and agile, while the B-17 was a wounded behemoth. He moved in behind and below the bomber, the classic attack position. He armed his guns. His finger curled around the trigger on his control stick. This was it, the moment of triumph. But first, standard procedure dictated he pull alongside to confirm the kill and identify the aircraft type. He eased the throttle forward and slid his fighter up onto the bomber's left wing. And then he saw it. It wasn't a warplane anymore. It was a wreck, a flying sieve. Through massive gaping holes in the fuselage, Stigler could see clear through to the other side of the sky. The tail section was so mangled he couldn't comprehend how it was still attached to the rest of the plane. He looked at the tail gunner's position. It was silent, and he could see the gunner, slumped over and lifeless, his uniform stained dark. He saw the waist gunners, wounded and bloodied, struggling to help each other. The plane looked like it had been put through a shredder. Then he drew his eyes towards the cockpit. He could see the pilot, Charlie Brown, wrestling with the controls, his face a mask of exhaustion and terror. For a fleeting second, across a few feet of howling wind and roaring engines, their eyes met, a German ace and an American farm boy.
In that instant, Franz Stigler wasn't thinking about the Knight's Cross. He was thinking of Gustav Rodel's words, "You fight by the rules to keep your humanity." He thought of the unwritten code of chivalry among pilots. You don't shoot a man in a parachute. Why? Because he is helpless. He can no longer fight back. He is defenseless. And as he looked at the shattered remains of Ye Olde Pub and the dying men inside, he realized they were no different. This wasn't combat. This was an execution. Shooting them down wouldn't be a victory. It would be murder. Franz Stigler made a decision. A decision that, if discovered, would have seen him stood up against a wall and shot for treason. Inside Ye Olde Pub, the remaining crew looked out their shattered windows and froze in terror. A German fighter, the Knight of the Skies, was flying just feet from their wingtip. They could see the pilot clearly. They braced for the end. A few of the crewmen tried to point their remaining guns at him, but they had almost no ammunition left, and the guns were jammed or broken. But the German pilot didn't shoot. Instead, he raised his hand and waved. Then he pointed down toward the German soil below, gesturing for them to land. Charlie Brown shook his head. No. Landing meant becoming prisoners of war. They would rather take their chances in the sky. Stigler understood. He gave a nod. And then he did something even more extraordinary. He repositioned his fighter, moving slightly ahead and to the side of the bomber's wing. He was deliberately placing himself in a formal escort position. His purpose was brilliant and suicidally brave. The German coastline was littered with anti-aircraft flak batteries, trained to fire on any enemy bomber they saw. But the gunners on the ground, seeing a German fighter flying in perfect formation with an American bomber, would be confused. They would hold their fire. assuming it must be a captured aircraft being escorted to a German airfield, or perhaps some bizarre training exercise.
For several long, agonizing minutes, Franz Stigler used his own fighter plane as a shield, protecting the American bomber from his own country's defenses. Every second he stayed with them, he risked being seen by another Luftwaffe pilot, by a superior on the ground, by anyone who could report his incomprehensible act of mercy. They flew like this over the German coast and out towards the cold gray expanse of the North Sea. Stigler knew he was at the limit of his fuel and his luck. He pulled in close one last time, locking eyes with Charlie Brown again. He raised his helmet to his helmet in a crisp, formal military salute. One pilot to another. Then, he peeled his Bf-109 away, banked sharply, and flew back towards Germany, disappearing into the clouds. Charlie Brown and his crew watched him go, stunned into silence. They couldn't process what had just happened. An enemy, a man they were sent to kill, and who was sent to kill them, had just saved all of their lives. Miraculously, Ye Olde Pub limped across the 250 miles of the North Sea. The plane finally made it to England, landing at the RAF emergency field at Seething. When the ground crews saw the aircraft, they stood in stunned disbelief. It was so catastrophically damaged, they couldn't fathom how it had held together in the air. The bomber never flew again. It was immediately scrapped for parts. But every surviving member of the crew made it home.
This single act of humanity, a choice made in a split second, is one of the most powerful stories to come out of the Second World War. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, our choices define us. We are dedicated to finding and sharing these profound moments from history. If you believe this work is important, please consider clicking that subscribe button. You become a part of a community that keeps these memories alive. For Franz Stigler, the return to base was a quiet one. He told his commanding officer that he'd shot the bomber down over the sea and that it had crashed. He never spoke of the real encounter. To admit what he had done, actively helping an enemy escape, was a death sentence. It was treason. He continued to fly for the Luftwaffe, ultimately flying the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. He would end the war with 28 confirmed kills, surviving being shot down 17 times himself. After the war, he emigrated to Canada in 1953 and became a successful businessman in Vancouver. For Charlie Brown, the war ended as well. He returned to the United States, went to college, and later served in the Air Force and the State Department. But for both men, the memory of that December day was burned into their minds. Charlie told his crew to never speak of it. He worried that if the U.S. military learned an enemy pilot had let them go, they might face difficult questions, perhaps even accusations of cowardice or collusion. Franz kept his secret out of self-preservation. For 40 years, the story remained locked away in the hearts of two men, an ocean apart. But Charlie Brown could never forget the German pilot's face, or the salute. In 1986, now retired, he began a quest. He had to know who that pilot was and why he had done what he did. He placed an ad in a Combat Pilot Association newsletter, recounting the details of the mission, the damage, the escort, and asking a simple question. Does anyone know who this pilot might have been? The newsletter made its way across the Atlantic, and eventually a copy landed in the hands of Franz Stigler in Canada. He read the notice, and the memories of 43 years came flooding back. He knew it was him. In 1990, after a nervous exchange of letters, Charlie Brown got on a plane. They agreed to meet.
Imagine that moment. Charlie Brown, now 68 years old, and Franz Stigler, 75, seeing each other for the first time on the ground. There was no hesitation. They recognized each other instantly. They fell into an embrace, two old men weeping. Franz confirmed every detail of Charlie's story. He explained the code of honor, the words of his teacher, the shocking sight of the crippled bomber. He told Charlie that for 47 years, he hadn't felt guilt for sparing them, but for all the others he hadn't. The crew of Ye Old Pub, he said, had reminded him that his enemies were just men, like him. The two men became the closest of friends, bonded by a shared secret that had defined their lives. They were like brothers. They spent their remaining years appearing at air shows and veterans reunions, telling their incredible story. They spoke on the phone every single week. Franz Stigler passed away in 2008 at the age of 92. Charlie Brown died just 8 months later, at 87. Their friendship, born from a moment of mercy in the crucible of war, had outlasted the conflict that was meant to make them enemies. Franz never got his Knight's Cross. He sacrificed Germany's highest honor for something far more valuable. He kept his humanity. The story of Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown is not about war. It's about what transcends war. It's about the recognition of a shared humanity that can, even in the most hellish of circumstances, shine through. Franz looked at his enemy and didn't see a target or a political ideology. He saw human beings in trouble. And in that moment, he chose mercy over medals, compassion over orders. And that single choice gave 10 men their lives, gave 2 men an unbreakable friendship, and gave us all a timeless lesson in what it truly means to be human.
Thank you all so much for joining me for this incredible story. It's a testament to the fact that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about people and the profound choices they make. The bond between Franz and Charlie is something I think we can all learn from. If you haven't already, please do subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Your support is what makes this channel possible. We'll see you in the next one.